Welcome to Beyond Disruption, where you'll learn how emerging tech is changing the world of accounting, business, and finance. Our guest experts break down the latest news in everything from blockchain to robotics, artificial intelligence to human intelligence. Tune in to find out how you can stay ahead of the curve.
Hello, from our office in London, UK, I'm Kyle Hammond. In this episode of the podcast, the question today's CPAs need to ask about tomorrow's blockchain, we'll be talking about Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrency with expert guest Kirk Phillips, also known as the Bitcoin CPA. He'll help us answer questions like, is there really such a thing as the blockchain? Doesn't professional skepticism seem a bit out of place and unnecessary in this secure new world? And why did he write a book about this all anyway? Isn't everything in the cloud? Those are just some of the things we'll be talking about with Kirk. So let's get started. Hi, Kirk. Where are you speaking to us from today?
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you having me on the show today. I'm speaking from Philadelphia, PA, USA.
The weather there not too warm, so you've got a cup of coffee in hand, as do I. In between sips, we look forward to discussing a lot of interesting things, so thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. We'll be sharing your experience and insights with our community in more than 110 countries, and some of those listeners may already be aware of your work, but for everyone else, here's a quick introduction. You've a niche consulting practice in the crypto blockchain space, and that's in addition to pioneering many other projects. You're the author of the Ultimate Bitcoin Business Guide. You've also been part of the AICPA's Blockchain Fundamentals program. You're a blogger. You're a contributor to Why Bitcoin magazine as well as CoinDesk, and you're most excited about how blockchain will transform accounting. Essentially, you know what you're talking about, and I think that's a good start. So what have we left out about you and your work as the Bitcoin CPA? What else do you do that connects with our topic?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that kind introduction there. And there's many things I'm involved with. It's possible I could even forget some at this point. But I think another thing that's worth noting is I've been fortunate to participate in the AICPA's Virtual Currency Task Force. Which came out of one of the existing practice groups, I guess, Individual Tax Unit or something along those lines. And the intention of that group was to really put together a frequently asked questions and recommended approaches to the IRS guidance around virtual currencies, which has been quite a lack thereof for the past 4 years since the IRS put out a bulletin in 2014 and hasn't put out any guidance, since that time. So we worked in the beginning of this year, 2018, for several months, and near the end of May, we finally put out a letter to the IRS saying, hey, here's what we think are the frequently asked questions and the recommendations to those questions, because we thought it would be the better approach to provide what the recommendations are so that we've actually done all the work so-called, for the IRS. So it was great to be a part of that topic because it was really great to dig inside of and work along with other really intelligent people who understand tax even deeper than I do in many cases, and work together to understand these nuanced topics and how it's challenging. And really it's interesting because like many emerging technologies, people are actually seeking guidance, and you have to navigate without having it until it emerges at a later time. So these are interesting times.
That is the tax collection organization that essentially every person in the USA makes sure they're able to stay on the right side of.
Yes, I should have clarified that a little bit more, but that is correct. The Internal Revenue Service is tackling these types of issues, and every other agency, similar agency in every other country, is also doing the same thing.
When it comes to the blockchain, what are some of the things that people just assume or presume that actually they haven't got entirely right? So when it comes especially to the finance and accounting profession, this technology is about much more than just Bitcoin, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That's a great question. I think one of the things that is talked about in articles and in other podcasts and so forth is you'll often see the blockchain referred to, like there's one almighty blockchain, the blockchain, when in fact there are over 2,000 cryptocurrencies, and you could say over 2,000 related blockchains. Now, some may be close copies of another. Some may be, inherently of a new, of a new development nature and so forth. But when it comes down to it, every blockchain is different, and therefore all the parameters related to it are different, and the aspects of the cryptocurrency that's native to that particular blockchain are different. So you could have a set of parameters that might be, 40, 50 different, aspects or characteristics that are different from one blockchain to another. So just to say the blockchain, as it's like one almighty blockchain that encompasses everything, is really quite something that needs to be reeled in a bit, especially when it comes to the accountant and CPA, who are folks that typically pay attention to the finer details. And in addition to that, when it comes to the Bitcoin blockchain, we have the best example of immutability that we've ever had in history. So whatever that bar was, that endpoint was for the best example, it's now been shifted to the right or to the left, depending whichever way you want to look at it. And we now have a new standard for immutability. Well, that's also the other thing that's often talked about with the blockchain. You say, oh, the blockchain has immutability and so forth. Well, again, which blockchain are you talking about? Bitcoin blockchain is highly immutable. And in fact, we might even call it the immutability layer for other cryptocurrencies. And so it depends which one. You may have another one that may have aspects of immutability, but in fact, it's, maybe have less immutability than Bitcoin does. So really important. The blockchain is really referring to the Bitcoin blockchain, but then there are blockchains. And hey, I even catch myself saying that incorrectly as well. So it's really important to get the finer details of the nuances of the terminology, and in many cases they are used in one way in practice, even though it's not technically correct. And it may be sometimes they're used in practice in a way that actually is not the way that, let's say, people in the space would say it, but in some cases it's not technically correct, but that's just the way that it's used. And let's say that's the standard agreed upon way to talk about it. So these are the nuances that CPAs and accountants and auditors need to really understand, because then they're going to be relied on as that trusted source, of course.
And this is a change which most people are starting to pay a lot of attention to. As you said, the IRS has been aware of it since 2014, but whether they've been paying attention to it since then is, well, something that you've helped to make sure that they do. Change is all around us, and whether we're paying attention to it or not, we are surrounded by disruption or the potential for disruption, but things have always been changing. And in the context of the work that you've done, what was the last big disruption that you saw in the profession? What happened to those that didn't adapt, and how did it change the organizations that you may have been working with at the time? Sometimes for the better, sometimes not.
Right. Well, it just so happens that I've come into the profession over the last approximately 20 years. So when I first came in and worked at a large regional public accounting firm, it so happened that at that time, they had just adopted new technologies, many of them around tax return preparation and things like that. But it was only 1 or 2 years removed from when they didn't have any of those technologies. And that means the tax return preparation was just 1 or 2 years removed from where it had been done by hand. So it's been a rapid shift towards cloud-based technology, as many CPAs are aware of that. The interesting thing is it's been available for such a long time, but the next thing to look at is, well, what's been the adoption of it? Well, if you look at the entire spectrum of CPAs, from the big four firms all the way down to the sole practitioner, you'll see that you still have arguably a majority of folks who haven't fully adopted the capabilities that are available. I'm not saying they haven't adopted some things, but I think they haven't adopted the majority of it. And again, this is the full spectrum of CPAs. You'll see various articles on it. I've talked to other people who really have their finger on the pulse of this type of thing. So really, we have capabilities that are something that's been developed in the cloud-based arena that's from 20 years ago, and there's still a whole lot more that could be adopted around that. And that's really disruptive, because you have the in the old model, when you even had software coming into being in the first place, it was often locally based, and you had really expensive contracts with the supplier. To install it, the new upgrades, as well as a service contract and maintenance contract, throughout the year. And these would be very, very expensive. Now we're talking about reduced reducing these costs down to really quite marginal subscription fees. And you don't have to worry about any of the upgrades or anything. It's all taken care of. That's kind of the beauty of that whole thing. So, but, with all that being said, still all those things are kind of digital versions of the principles of accounting, the analog principles of accounting that Pacioli distinguished 500 years ago. The father of accounting, as noted by the book that he published. Now, he's called the father of accounting, or is given credit for inventing it. It's more like, in my mind, he's actually distinguished what accounting was because he observed it taking place with the merchants and so forth. To me, it's already a principle that existed. It was who was the first person to observe it and distinguish it. But anyway, we just roll that forward 500 years. And even with cloud-based accounting, we still have essentially a digital version of its former self. So now with blockchain, however, we have what I think is the first radical innovation in 500 years that has the potential to disrupt the way we've done things before. So one of those things is that we now have the immutability that I talked about before with the Bitcoin ledger, which really means one version of the truth. And so in my mind, this is an auditor's best friend and an accountant's best friend, to have one version of the truth. CPAs are constantly dealing with multiple versions of different ledgers and so forth. Every entity has to maintain their own ledger and their own version of facts and circumstances, if you will. And then you've got the differences between all these different ledgers, rather than potentially having one ledger that can be shared, or a series of ledgers that can be shared among different parties with very varying levels of transparency and so forth, to really have one version of the truth. And a lot of the time is spent reconciling. That's one of the big things that accountants do. And even in the securities field as well, securities industry, there's reconciling the settlement and so on and so forth. So there's billions of dollars that are being spent on reconciliation in the securities markets. And I can only imagine if you figured out what the percentage of reconciling, was of all the tasks that, accountants did, it would be a huge thing. So that you now have the potential to eliminate reconciling. It doesn't even exist. You reconcile because somebody's got a record over here and you've got a record over there, and you have to reconcile between the two. So if you can eliminate that, that's a huge value add. But really being able to have something that's immutable, meaning it can't be altered by fraud and so on and so forth, the power of that is just really quite amazing. So that's why I think that Bitcoin is the immutability layer, and may stay that way. There may be other blockchains that surpass that and become a immutability layer, or maybe a combination of them. But it's an exciting world we're moving into.
Talking of moving into an exciting world, looking at the crypto market itself right now, there have been dramatic peaks and troughs, highs and lows in the value of cryptocurrency. So what are your thoughts on how things are in the crypto market right now?
I'm personally long on blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. So when I say long, I mean, long term in its potential, and long in almost every sense of the word. And I'm also a cryptocurrency investor because, as we'll get to, I believe that it's very experiential. You can't really understand it unless you use it. So having used it, quite a bit, and having invested in it, the price and the value thing is like a bonus in my mind. It's the essence of it. It's the marrow of it. It's like what it stands for. Its disruptive potential. That's all the stuff that motivates me. That's what I'm long on. So anything that happens with value and price is like a bonus. I've seen it go up. I've seen it go down. And yeah, I think there was some exuberance in there that led up to the January high of a year ago. But I think that, long term, it's going to even out. As a matter of fact, there was a fund manager. I can't think of what the guy's name is, but this was an article that just came out in CoinDesk, and he actually put up a $1 million bet that the cryptocurrency market would outperform the S&P over the next 10 years. And he came up with that because there was a famous Warren Buffett bet that actually just ended in 2018, apparently. Warren Buffett's bet was created in 2008. It was a similar bet where he said that the S&P would outperform. I'm not sure what the other side of the equation was. Let's say it was growth stocks, or, he was never one to get into the dot-com bubble because he never got into anything he didn't understand. So anyway, he made a famous bet that he said the S&P would outperform whatever the other side of the equation was. And of course, he won the bet. And that bet just ended in 2018. So this guy's making a similar bet saying, hey, for all the naysayers out there, I'll put up $1 million bet. Who wants to challenge it? Who wants to take me up on this bet that the cryptocurrency market will outperform the S&P? I think he should actually put more on the line for the number of naysayers that are out there. I think he should make it a $100 million bet or a $10 million bet. But anyway, with that being said, it's really quite an interesting thing here that you've got a dynamic that didn't exist before in the fiat world, meaning the USD, British pounds, euros, that type of thing, fiat world, where you've got these other assets that really take on the nature of many different things. They can take on the nature of medium of exchange, like dollars. They can take on the nature as a store of value, which could be more like potentially securities. I mean, you can think of fiat as a store of value, but fiat doesn't really appreciate, you see. Store of value means you store something and it maintains and actually increases in value. And that's what securities do. So it takes on many different aspects. It could be also, it's considered a commodity. It could be a security. It could be a medium of exchange. It could be all these things at the same time. So what happens is then that also creates, in many cases, in many countries, you have a capital gain that's created or a capital loss because you have the value. And then if you have to sell it to use it for something, whether it's to pay for operating expenses or whatever it is, that could trigger a gain or a loss. You could also have corresponding tax liabilities. And basically, you can get caught in a crypto squeeze play at the end of the day. So we've seen many different clients who are getting caught in their own unique squeeze play for whatever reason that is, for whatever they've done. A lot of it has to do with from the highs of January that we just referred to and the lows that we have now, people perhaps not understanding how these things are taxed, and then finding out at a later time, or any number of reasons. So, but the point here is that I always want to reiterate over and over again that AI CPA research and others indicate that CPAs are the most trusted professional out of all professionals. So that is a really huge asset that we have as CPAs, accountants, auditors. So with that, we have the ability to provide advice as it is to all of these startups out there that are struggling. So, there's businesses struggle for other reasons as well, right? Outside of crypto anyway, and blockchain, outside of the blockchain space, they already struggle. Well, CPAs already have the aptitude to provide the advice to help them weather the storm. So my point is, even with CPAs that don't even know about the blockchain space anyway, because they're inherently a trusted advisor, they can already bring something to the table with value, right? That these folks could say, hey, look, we're in a rough, stormy seas right now. Can you help us out? So that's just a thing that I want CPAs to realize is, for those who especially know about the space already and really want to figure out how do I get into it, you've already got the basis for getting into it. You've already got that trusted value proposition. Now you just have to add to it with some blockchain knowledge. When it comes to professional services, typically legal, accounting, and other, it really doesn't matter what the economic cycle is, because when the times are tough, you still need advice. When times are great, you still need advice. So CPA advice is somewhat immune to the economic cycle.
And then get started, essentially, because they're already further down the road, as you say, than perhaps many of them realize. It is that expertise and that status as a trusted professional which provides them with a great place to start. And then once they do get started, what will the road ahead look like? And that's not always clear when it comes to innovative technologies, when it comes to something like Bitcoin or blockchain. And even if the road ahead does seem to make sense, you're never quite sure what the destination will be. And this goes back to those questions that CPAs do need to ask, that professional skepticism we spoke about earlier. There are definitely some Bitcoin and crypto naysayers out there who are quite skeptical. So what do you have to say to them?
What I would say is it really comes down to a simple thing, is that I think that folks just don't understand it enough, or understand it perhaps at all, and that their paradigm prevents them from understanding it. So I have a favorite quote that I put in my book in my opening chapter, and it says that this is Upton Sinclair, right? So it's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And that perfectly applies in this space. So if you've got, there's economists that has perhaps dedicated their whole life, 30, 35 years to thinking about economics in a certain way. This is like, wow, maybe this could completely change the way that everything's done and the way you've thought about economics and so on. It could be the new economics. So, it really confronts people, I think, in a lot of cases in various industries, banking and economics and so on, securities markets. And it confronts people. And so instead of actually saying, hey, wow, let me understand this thing, there's a tendency to want to not understand it and therefore, speak against it, I suppose. So, and then of course, once people take a stand, this is just human nature. They take a stand on something, they continue to support their own position. It's very difficult for anyone to say, hey, you know what, I was wrong. So that's just the human nature thing there. Bitcoin, like I said, is the immutability layer, and it's the backbone of the entire cryptocurrency system. So, I'm seeing it in a new way every day, and I've been at this for 5 years. So I think that, again, like another point of view on Bitcoin is, oh, well, it can't compete with Visa, so it's not valuable. Well, that's accurate. It's not trying to compete with Visa. There's going to be other. That's why we have 2,000 other cryptocurrencies and counting, and thousands of blockchains, because they're all competing to provide something that's a solution to a better solution to what we have in the existing financial market. There's already solutions that are trying to come up with your Visa style tens of thousands of transactions per second. Bitcoin perhaps might have been that in the beginning. It's not trying to be that now. But what it is it's like I said, it's the immutability layer, because it's not just about the transaction and the ledger not being rewritten, but you can actually use hashes, cryptography, to put a hash in the blockchain, which can then verify that a document hasn't been changed. That's the power of it. It's not just a financial transaction thing. The fact that you can prove that a document hasn't changed, when you think about that from the auditor's perspective, that's why I say that this technology is an auditor's best friend. And in addition, Bitcoin, it supports the backbone of the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem. Like I said, I think that's something that's overlooked. There's many, many things, in my opinion, that are overlooked here, where the value of it is underestimated. And so I think it's going to be the test of time. But like I said, I'm long on the matter.
And we'll be looking at some more of those commonly overlooked aspects of Bitcoin and blockchain in a minute. I just thought I'd take the opportunity to remind our listeners that they are listening to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. I'm Kyle Hannon from the London office of the AICPA and CIMA. We're talking to the Bitcoin CPA, Kirk Phillips. Kirk, looking at what's happening now, what are some practical steps that you'd recommend that would help the affected sectors of our profession become better at turning these disruptions into opportunities? What are some of the common things they may already be overlooking?
Some of the things that need to be taken into consideration are the existing approaches that you would have anyway, the CPAs have. We have to have continuing education on an annual or biannual basis. So education is really a big part of the profession. And that's one of the fundamentals of understanding cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. Education, education, education. I think of Stephen Covey's The Law of the Farm principle. And this is where you have to plant, sow, and nurture the farm and whatever crops you happen to be growing. You can't cram that. You can't do it out of order. You can't speed it up. It is what it is. Right? You can't cram the law of the farm. And that's, in my mind, when it comes to education about this, you really can't cram for it. It's a new paradigm that you really can't compare to anything that exists. And that's actually where the skepticism comes from, by the way, just to go back to the previous point. By the way, if you take the top 1,000 people in the blockchain space, or whatever number you want to pick, every single one of them was skeptical. The question was, how long were they skeptical for? I was skeptical. That's how the book started. Somebody asked me about, hey, should we do Bitcoin mining and, buy a computer and invest money in that? And I was like, thinking to myself, what are you talking about? You better go get your facts straight. Well, I'm the one who didn't know what he was talking about. So everybody is skeptical with this because it's such a new paradigm. And it's when and how you overcome your skepticism. Hopefully you do. So That's why you can't just cram for this. You have to absorb it over time. So that's why it's most important to start now. Start now educating yourself by listening to these podcasts, by going to some of the news sites and so on and so forth, going to conferences, going to AI CPAs products, AI CPA store, and really just become a user, because I think you have to experience it. It's very experiential. So not only educate, but you have to go use the technology. So that's set up wallets, set up, exchange accounts where you can buy and sell cryptocurrency and send some transactions and actually use it. So when you go talk to clients, you don't want to have them ask you, hey, have you ever used it? And you say no, and you're claiming that you're now, you have a new practice area, in your firm perhaps, and you can't claim you've even used it before. That's not going to look too good. So of course, networking, going to conferences, that's stuff that we already do as well. But, you can narrow it down to networking and conferences that are on a specific topic. So starting now is really the key thing. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Absolutely. No question about it.
So I'm getting a strong sense that it's not so much when you start, it's the fact that you start. That's the most important thing.
Yes, it is.
Jump in, but keep your eyes open. Now, we understand that with every plateful of possible rewards comes a definite side order of risk. Does a finance professional need to start looking at pros and cons in the same way that they always have, or is it time to be looking at the pluses and minuses of Bitcoin and blockchain in a different way? How important is understanding risk in this new landscape?
Probably the single most important thing to take on. And you'll hear me talk about all the positives, and I can go on and on for hours about how great I think blockchain technology is and cryptocurrencies and what the potential is. I could go on for forever about that, but you have to stop and look back in wearing the CPA hat. We now have a new set of risks that we didn't have before. That's what CPAs do. Whatever capacity it is, even if it's auditing or accounting, CFO, any of those levels, it's really about assessing risk. We have integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, right? All those things. So in being objective, you have to assess the risk and take an objective approach to it. So these things are already done in the existing world, let's say before blockchain. But now what we have is, with this paradigm, comes a whole new set of risks and a whole new set of things that happen that never happened before. So we now have chain splits, 51% attacks. We've got hard forks. We've got permanently frozen funds and wallets. We've got all kinds of stuff that's happened. And you may not have heard these words, and that's an example of why these things are new. They didn't exist before. So not only do we have a new set of risks, but what's at stake is higher, meaning that in the worst case scenario, what's at stake is a complete loss of assets in many cases. We've got several examples of that. The Parity wallet, where we have $150 million of Ethereum permanently frozen still today. We had the DAO hack of 2016, I believe it is. That was $50 to $100 million, somewhere in there. So we've got many examples where we got real assets at stake. So that's why understanding these risks is very important. And not just understanding the current risks about what has happened, but it's important, maybe even more important, to take what's already happened and understanding the risks there and then projecting those risks. So anticipating risks. That's a message that I like to talk about over and over again. It's more important in this technology to anticipate the risk. And that's really where the CPA auditor account is going to provide massive value, in addition to everything else, in addition to the trust. But really being able to anticipate risk in this space. And of course, you can't, again, anticipate risk unless what? You are constantly educating yourself. You are an experiential user. Like I just said, you have to use it, and so on and so on. So one of the reasons you have the risk here is because the risk in security and responsibility and custody, not in every case, but in the essence of Bitcoin and other similar cryptocurrencies, all those things are shifted to the end user. Whereas in the existing model, we have third-party financial institutions. Now, we also know what the risk is there with 2008 and so forth. But you now have the ability to manage your own assets like we never had that before. But with that comes also the risk of loss and so on and so forth. So that's why the stakes are very high. That's why CPAs have to pay attention to it. And that's why we can add value, tremendous value.
You've been talking about looking ahead and understanding how to anticipate things, which is something that the profession has always been particularly good at. So let's do some more of that. Let's get ahead of the curve and ask you to look at your own experience and research. What is that telling you about the kind of things that we need to anticipate? What's the next disruption that you see coming, the big change that you see that lies ahead? And does that apply to everyone in the profession equally? A sole practitioner, team leaders, perhaps heads of enterprise level finance divisions? What's next? How do we prep for that?
Yes, excellent question. Yes, there is definitely disruption coming to the profession. It's going to come at all levels, whether it's sole practitioner, your enterprise level finance division leaders and CFOs and so forth. It may impact them all differently, but there is going to be major disruption for everyone. When's that going to happen? Don't know. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years for sure. We often, in technology, the short term is overestimated and the long term is underestimated. So with that being said, what we are heading towards, though, is we are heading towards a time when we are going to have spontaneously produced live financial statements. I mean, this is something that perhaps was talked about in the past, but wasn't serious because we didn't really have the technology, I think, to be able to do that. Well, now we do have that. That's what we're moving towards. In the existing model today, we've got financials that are produced by auditors that are 3 months old, perhaps sometimes even longer than that, really. Sometimes by the time the financial is produced, it could be 9 months, maybe a year later. But let's just say it's 3 months. With 3 months, those financials, one of the things we talk about is feedback value with information. So the feedback value is stale. And therefore the feedback value is much lower the longer the time is that that information comes out. So what would a world look like if we had financial statements that were in real time? That's a game changer, because now you have investors and lenders and others who'd be able to access the financials. And you're even going to have spontaneous lending. With spontaneous financial statements, you're going to have spontaneous lending. For those that want to have appropriate access to the financials. That's what it's about. It's about, there's going to be access levels, but who has access? What's the level of transparency? But nonetheless, you're going to be able to have, instead of you going to ask for lending and some traditional models of lending, it takes weeks to get financing if you can even get it, from a traditional lender. Well, now we're actually going to have offers that are going to be showing up because of the fact that you're going to have information that's going to be accessible. That's the future way down the road. But the fact that we're going to have these spontaneously produced financial statements, like I think of the Audit Chain Project is one that's working on this right now. And a full disclosure, I'm working with them in various aspects of this project, but I'm not aware of another one that's quite taking on. There may be some others out there, but this is one that's got a lot of promise and is going to really be amazing when it pulls this off. And you're going to have what they call a Decarp Explorer, which is like a portal, if you will, that's going to allow folks to be able to drill down and see these, see information in a real-time basis. So what else does that mean? The auditors will be able to provide this real-time continuous auditing in some form or fashion. And this is really a disruption that needs to happen now, not something that's 5 or 10 years out. The reason we need to have it now, because we can just look at the Kirlian scandal and the KPMG scandal from 2017. And when you look at that, you have to ask yourself, wow, is the auditing model broken? Is there a monopoly on having the big four essentially have an audit monopoly on 97% of the larger companies and so forth? So we really need a change in the model now.
So for those who aren't familiar with what happened, let's just contextualize that quickly. That did happen in the UK. For those who may have heard mention of Kirlian, can you just summarize why that is so relevant in this context?
Yes, the Kirlian scandal is really it's a scandal of epic proportions. So we can think back about Enron and some of the others from years ago. This is perhaps even more epic than that is. And this is something that if any of the CPAs out there aren't aware of this or haven't researched it that much, you should really do this. Hopefully there'll be some great documentaries that come out on this as well. But this is an epic scandal where you have a breakdown not only with the auditing firm, but regulators, C-level management, even actually other auditors, because you had KPMG was the financial statement auditor, but then you had PricewaterhouseCoopers was the auditor for the pension fund, and so on. So there's really an epic breakdown across the board between all of the different players. And you're talking about KPMG signing off in somewhere around the first quarter of 2017, signing off saying that $150 million of profit. Now that might be quarterly profit. I'm not sure, but nonetheless, signing off on a big number, essentially attesting to the health of the company and the financial health. And yet several months later, the company just collapses when they can no longer support the scheme that was going on. And then come to find out there was only 29 million pounds in cash and a corresponding 1.3 billion pounds in debt. And then you had just, a few months earlier, all of a sudden this looked like a healthy company. So you had, then you look at what's the impact, and that doesn't even consider the conversation about the 2.5 or 2.9 billion pound shortfall in having a fully funded pension plan. The company was more interested in their own self-interest than those of the employees. So you had all the employees in that pension fund were left, hanging potentially with no pension. So it's really sick and disgusting when you think about it. The members of parliament called it a reckless hubris and greed and so on and so forth. If you look at the statements that are about it, it's really quite shocking. So that's why we need a solution today to change the model.
You said the word change. That's a word which always catches people's attention. So what does this change mean in practice? I mean, how far will this change, this innovation go? How, for example, will the auditor's role change in this new future? Well,
we have a new world where, again, referring back to the audit chain project, where you're going to have the auditors be able to engage in independent validation, independent attestation. I'm going to say self-serve attestation, that type of thing. This is really, it really takes something to wrap your head around it when you think about it. So we may have a case where the auditors become miners. When I say miners, we're talking about like Bitcoin miners and other blockchains where miners secure the network and therefore are rewarded for the security by receiving a native token as compensation. Or secure nodes is another method where nodes can relay transactions and so on and so forth. And a secure node model where the secure node operator would be required to put assets at stake, which would be a token at stake. So for example, Audit Chain has an AUDT token. So that could be something that would be put at stake on an audit node. So basically auditors could become a certain secure node operator. So they are keeping the strength and integrity of the network operating because you have a financial commitment at stake. And also when it's at stake, that means you have a risk of loss if you did not play by the rules and so forth. So, we're going to have a case of where you've got information flowing from the source all the way to these live financial statements, and you got a lot of places it could flow through to get there, existing software, financial software, and so on and so forth. But the idea is that the data is going to make a hop. Let's say every time it makes a hop, there's a hash. Hash is another way to verify that every step of the way. And this is how auditors can essentially, the same way you can log into any account that you want, let's say 24 hours a day from your computer. I think it's going to be a world where the auditor can just do attestation whenever it works for them. They're not beholden to going to an office to a client, begging for information that they don't get and having to ask for it over and over again. You're going to be able to have it on your own terms, which I think is a huge breakthrough. So there's going to be an increase in the value proposition here and an elimination of non-value added services. I think that one day I'd even propose this in a conversation. Is it possible where we talked about the 1-to-1 ratio of the client paying the auditor directly. Perhaps we could have a day where you would have auditors actually providing attestation without even knowing what the entity is that they're providing the attestation for. That's my kind of futuristic prediction or proposition. It's far out there, but I think that's possible.
Fascinating. Now, let's talk about your book, because I know that you're an author as well, which is something that we did mention at the beginning. Tell us why you've decided that a book was the thing to write, when surely these days all the information that people need is surely sitting online in the cloud. Why was this the right thing to do?
Yes, great question. Well, I think I alluded to it briefly before, but it was about Jan 1 of 5 years ago, Jan 1, 2014. And a colleague, friend said, "Hey, Kirk, can I ask for some advice?" And I said, "Sure. Hey, have you heard about Bitcoin?" "No, I haven't heard about it. I'll have to look into it." "No, we want to know about buying some mining equipment so we can make some money." And of course, my skeptical mind, in the background, my mind saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You better go get your facts straight." And really, I was like, "Okay, sure, I'll get back to you." Well, I went and ended up going down the Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrency rabbit hole. Typical story that you'll hear from folks. And then I'm still way down the rabbit hole. But as a result, 2 years later, I finished the book, and that was my answer to her question. So I was somewhat motivated to do a book project, I guess, over the years. And it was just a perfect storm is really what happened. I ended up writing the book. Now, the byproduct of that is that I wouldn't have taken the approach to go down and do all of the depth of research. There would have been no other thing that I could have taken on that would have had me go down the rabbit hole to the depth of research and experiential, power using that I did if it wasn't for that. So maybe I would have gotten there one day, but certainly not in the condensed period of time. So then therefore that's one thing's led to another, and it's just kind of developed into a niche consulting practice and all these other things that we mentioned. So it's an exciting time. I love innovation, and I love also educating too. That's really part of the book. Is my original intention was to be the translator really between the two universes, the blockchain universe and the CPA universe. And I mean, here we are today. I'm translating now. So it's kind of like that was the original intention, and here it is being fulfilled. So I appreciate you having me on the podcast.
For anyone who wants to understand not so much the nature of the disruption, but the opportunities that it could provide in the future, where would you suggest that they go online to find out more about this topic in general, and of course about your work in particular?
Right. Well, we have a website that's the bitcoincpa.com that we're likely going to be revamping to fulfill the vision of being the translator between the two universes, like I just said, and to provide a trusted source for CPAs and accountants. I mean, who better to trust than, one of your own kind, so to speak. So, and of course, the AICPA was the author of the blockchain fundamentals course that they are rebroadcasting, as well as, I believe, putting on a roadshow. So the in-person courses are a great way to really network and synthesize the information. AICPA is also putting out additional courses on the 2019 roadmap. So that's something to look out for. You also have CoinDesk.com and Bitcoin.com are good, pure blockchain cryptocurrency news resource sites, among other resources there. There's other sites that are dedicated solely to the topic as well, but those are good resources. And then one of my longtime favorites, Let's Talk Bitcoin, has been a podcast for 5-6 years dedicated to the topics in the space. I mean, these are all things I use to educate myself along the way. So you really just continue the process and start now.
And how do people look for you online? What hashtags or profile names do they look for you under?
Well, I use the same handle, so Twitter handle, at the Bitcoin CPA. That's the website, email, and so forth. So you can go to the website, connect there, or also at the Bitcoin CPA on Twitter.
Great. Now, that takes us to the end of a conversation that, as you've said, could go on and on, because this technology is going to be with us for the foreseeable future. So in the time we have left, what is one simple message you'd like to leave for accounting and finance professionals that will help them to go beyond disruption?
I just want to reiterate a message that I've said before, which is that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now, someone might argue that the dawning of the internet from 20 to 25 years ago was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I wouldn't dispute that. So perhaps if you're lucky enough, we have two once-in-a-lifetime opportunities in one lifetime. I somewhat missed the internet opportunity, so to speak, at least in the very early days. So I'm fortunate to be here for what I think is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Now, when I say that, I mean for many, many different people, almost for anybody really, but especially in the CPA realm. Absolutely, in many, many different ways that's statement holds true. It took a while to get traction, but I know that many of the larger firms and the next tier firms down, mid-tier firms have all developed a blockchain practice now in some form or fashion. I'd be surprised to find out if there was any in that realm that hadn't developed a blockchain practice. So anyone that has a passion for innovation and technology, the leap should be really easy for you. If perhaps some folks are, you can see that they're near the end of the career and they don't really want to make a change, that's fine. Anybody that's younger or anywhere in the middle of their career have to take notice of it, because it's just going to be something that is eventually going to hit. So I think the thing is just continue to learn, use it, experience it, networking and educating. And even if you can't see the clear path at the current moment as to where this is going to go, as long as if you have a passion and an interest, you just got to go for it now. And what will happen is eventually the opportunity and the rewards and so forth will just reveal themselves to you.
Bitcoin CPA Kirk Phillips. Thank you, Kirk. There is lots more to explore around blockchain and Bitcoin, so we'll make sure our show notes include links to all of the resources that we have mentioned. And as Kirk mentioned too, there are a couple of websites that listeners interested in taking this further would be well recommended to visit, and they may already be on your browser bookmarks list. If you're a member, you may already be using one or the other of these websites, depending on where you are in the world. AICPAstore.com or CGMAstore.com. Just go to AICPAstore.com/GoBeyondDisruption or CGMAstore.com/GoBeyondDisruption. That's where you'll find courses, webinars, and more professional development resources that are consistently updated to keep you ahead of the curve. For exclusive insights and perspectives every week, you can get our latest episodes of the podcast wherever you already get your podcasts or your music. So that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio. Free, completely automatic. Just tap the subscribe or follow buttons on your podcast app or online. Or you can also go online and search for Go Beyond Disruption podcast. You can even say to your smart assistant, hey, blah, 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 play the latest episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, and it will do it. So, whichever path you take, we hope that once you get there, you'll get something useful from this episode, from every episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. And if you do, go ahead and share them with someone in your network who'd enjoy them too. I'm Kyle Hannon, and we'll be back soon with more insights that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material. 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 On such material.